Hercule Poirot and the Letter That Arrived Too Late. Chapter 1. The Last Tea at Langford Chase. The evening mist spread gently across the Surrey countryside, enveloping the treetops as if nature itself wished to conceal the secrets Langford Chase held within its ancient stone walls. It was a mansion from a bygone era, too large for a single family, yet still inhabited with an air of perpetuity. Lady Rosalind Worsley raised her china cup with a trembling hand and looked at her three guests with a faint smile. Seated opposite her, the young and lively Charlotte Ingram played idly with a teaspoon, while Lord Edwin Marchbank leafed without interest through an edition of the Times. The third, Reverend Silas Greaves, stared out the window, his thoughts evidently elsewhere. A strange atmosphere hung in the tea-room, as if something invisible stood between them. "So you've decided," Lady Rosalind said firmly, though her eyes betrayed anxiety. "The sale of Langford will be made public on Monday." Lord Edwin put the newspaper aside. "It's the most sensible thing to do. This house belongs to another era, dear Rosalind. Keeping it has ceased to make sense." Charlotte gave a bitter laugh. "Or have you just gotten tired of pretending the family still exists?" No one answered. The silence was interrupted by the metallic sound of the tea-tray falling. It was the maid, Elsie, who had just come in with the day's mail. Her face was as white as the china she had just broken. "My lady, excuse me, but this letter arrived unstamped and was left directly in the mailbox by the gate. There's no return address." Lady Rosalind frowned and took the envelope. It was made of cheap yellowed paper. The handwriting was nervous and uneven. As she opened it, her eyes scanned the words, and her face drained of colour. Without saying anything, she stood up, gripping the table as if the floor had given up. "What's going on?" Reverend Greaves asked with concern. Rosalind opened her mouth, but no words came out. She dropped the letter on the table and stumbled out of the room. Charlotte quickly grabbed it and read it aloud before anyone could stop her. "I know what you did that summer in Corsica. The past doesn't die. It's not buried. Your time is coming." A chill ran through the room. Edwin jumped to his feet. "This is blackmail. Or worse, what the hell happened in Corsica?" Charlotte asked. But Edwin had already set off after Rosalind. That night, the entire mansion seemed to be plunged into a deep unease. Shadows lengthened along the hallways, and a fine rain began to patter against the stained glass windows. At midnight, a scream broke the silence. Elsie, the maid, ran upstairs to Lady Rosalind's room. She found her lying on the couch, her eyes open, her body rigid. In her hand she was still holding the letter. The local doctor, Dr. Langdon, arrived 20 minutes later. He diagnosed cardiac arrest. But something about the scene didn't add up. The fire still burning in the fireplace, the untouched cup on the coffee table, the faint scent of bitter almonds. 2 days later, and after a disturbing conversation between, Charlotte and the Reverend Lord Edwin made an urgent call from his office. "Yes, I've heard you're in London. This is a delicate matter, and a very personal one. Lady Rosalind has died. Suddenly. But someone knew something, and I think it wasn't natural." On the other end of the line, a voice responded calmly. but with a force that seemed to traverse the distance with surgical precision. "I understand, monsieur. Tell him Hercule Poirot will be coming, and that, as always, his little grey cells are ready to work." Chapter 2. The Belgian at Langford Chase. The black carriage moved slowly along the damp path leading to Langford Chase, as the morning mist began to dissipate like a curtain being lifted. Hercule Poirot, bundled up in his travelling coat and wearing an impeccable bowler hat, gazed out the window with half-closed eyes. Beside him, Captain Arthur Hastings, recently returned from a brief stay in Bath, was leafing through a letter with an expression of growing curiosity. "So, this is an anonymous letter, a sudden collapse, and a death that smells, literally, of bitter almonds," Hastings murmured. Poirot nodded gravely. "And we mustn't forget, mon ami, the untimely nature of the letter itself. Your time is drawing near. Very melodramatic, don't you think? A style that reveals not only urgency, but theatricality. The murderer acts not only out of revenge, but also out of vanity." Upon reaching the entrance to Langford, they were greeted by Lord Edwin Marchbank. His normally haughty face displayed the weariness of sleepless nights. He shook their hands with forced politeness, and led them into the main hall. "Monsieur Poirot, and you, Captain Hastings, thank you for coming on such short notice." "Death doesn't wait, Lord Marchbank," Poirot replied, scanning the room with a careful eye. "Nor does the murderer." The drawing-room had changed little since afternoon tea. The same arrangement of furniture, the silver tray on the small table, the ashes still visible in the fireplace. However, Poirot paused before a vase of lilies on the sideboard and examined a small speck of earth on the floor beside it. "Who was in charge of cleaning the room after the death?" he asked immediately. "No one," Edwin replied in bewilderment. "Since Dr. Langdon arrived and determined the cause, we've sealed the room." "So that land wasn't there on the day of the incident?" Poirot said nothing further, and sat down in an armchair covered in burgundy velvet. "Tell me, Lord Marchbank, who was present when the letter was received?" "Charlotte Ingram, Reverend, Greaves and I. We were having tea with Rosalind. The letter arrived with no stamp or return address. And you think Lady Rosalind died? Of fear?" Edwin hesitated. She had a weak heart, and the letter was a shock. But her face, Poirot, she looked like she'd seen a ghost. And the letter, it spoke of Corsica. Poirot sat up with interest. "What happened in Corsica?" "I don't know. She went every summer, sometimes with Charlotte. She never talked about it." "And Charlotte? Where is she now?" "In his room. He refused breakfast. He said he couldn't bear to see this room again." Poirot rose with automatic elegance. "Then she's the one we'll talk to next." Charlotte Ingram received Poirot and Hastings in a drawing-room decorated with floral tapestries and a framed photograph of Lady Rosalind from a few years earlier, sitting on a seaside balcony. "I didn't kill Rosalind," he said bluntly, even before Poirot had spoken. "But I'm glad someone's starting to ask questions." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean, mademoiselle?" Charlotte crossed her legs, her expression oscillating between resentment and sadness. "Rosalind had secrets, and enemies. Corsica wasn't just a summer retreat. There was something there. An incident. I never knew the details, but she came back different. And you didn't ask. I asked, yes, but it was like talking to a statue. And then, a few weeks ago, he started receiving letters. Not like that one. Others. More subtle. Veiled threats. And he destroyed them? Always. She burned everything. She said the past should be kept dead. Poirot approached the desk and examined the drawers. In one, he found traces of charred paper on a ceramic saucer. He sniffed cautiously. Charcoal. And ink. Very recent. Mademoiselle, do you think Lady Rosalind knew the author of these letters? Charlotte did not respond immediately, I think. I was afraid of it, he whispered finally. And I think now that someone thinks they've won. Poirot nodded slowly. His eyes shone with a light Hastings knew well. The case had truly begun. Chapter 3. The Reverend and the Doctor. The midday sun fell weakly on the damp gardens of Langford Chase, as Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings walked slowly up the path to the small family chapel. There, next to the greenhouse and half hidden among untrimmed bushes, stood the cottage where the Reverend Silas Greaves used to retreat to write his sermons and, according to whispers from the servants, to discreetly sip cheap brandy from a carved glass. The Reverend greeted them with red eyes, but his voice was firm, almost defensive. Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, I regret that we find ourselves in such murky circumstances. Lady Rosalind was a woman of great dignity. The news of her death has come as a shock to everyone. Poirot nodded, watching every word carefully. And yet, Monsieur le Révérend, you seem less affected than the others. Greaves lifted his chin with a hint of pride. My faith teaches me to accept death with serenity. Besides, I can't say we were close. Rosalind and I, we disagreed on moral issues. She was a woman of secrets. Are you referring to the trips to Corsica? A slight tremble in the Reverend's cup gave him away. She tell you about it? How odd! Rosalind didn't trust anyone. But yes, summers in Corsica were unorthodox. Sometimes accompanied by Charlotte, sometimes by a gentleman who was never formally introduced. A Frenchman, I think. A name? No, just rumours. But I know one of those summers ended abruptly. Rosalind returned earlier than expected. She'd had an argument with someone. And since then she seemed more paranoid. Poirot interlaced his fingers. Do you think someone followed her to England? If she did it, it wasn't someone from this town. Everyone here knew and respected her, although the Reverend lowered his voice. There's been a dark blue car parked near the path several times in the last few weeks. I never found out who it belonged to. Poirot thanked him for his time and said his goodbyes politely. As he and Hastings returned to the main house, the detective murmured, "A mysterious car, an unknown lover, and a reverend who won't reveal everything he knows. Hastings, mon ami, the outline of a half-buried past begins to take shape." Dr. Langdon received them shortly afterward in his makeshift office in the east wing of the mansion, where he treated the servants and occasionally the Worsley family. He was a wiry man with a straggly moustache and fingers stained with prescription ink. "Chronic heart disease," he said bluntly. Lady Rosalind had been suffering from a complicated murmur for years. I told her myself months ago. Less stress, more rest. But that woman didn't know how to sit still. And death didn't surprise you? Asked Poirot. Langdon shrugged. Not especially. The letter may have upset her. The heart can bear anything, until it can't any more. Did you find anything unusual at the scene? Langdon hesitated for a moment. Well, there was a faint smell of almonds. But that doesn't mean anything. The fire in the fireplace, maybe some cheap perfume. There were no marks, no signs of violence. I didn't want to alarm anyone with baseless theories. Poirot stood up and walked over to a shelf full of jars. Did anyone have access to this wing of the house? In theory, no. But the keys to the corridors haven't been changed in decades, and Rosalind was trusting of her own kind. Could someone have given him cyanide? Langdon stared at him. That's a serious accusation, Monsieur Poirot. I should have given it to her without her noticing. Diluted, perhaps. But she was a meticulous woman. She didn't drink anything she didn't prepare herself. Poirot turned to Hastings. What if the poison wasn't in the drink, but in the letter? The doctor frowned. Poisoned ink? Not impossible, Poirot said gently, especially if the ink was manipulated to release vapours upon contact with the heat of the fire. But that requires chemical knowledge, Hastings replied. Exactly, said Poirot, and perhaps someone in this house owns it more than they let on. The mystery was beginning to narrow. Someone had manipulated more than memories. Someone had manipulated fear. Chapter 4. The Silent Heiress. The evening mist was just beginning to creep back through the hedges of Langford Chase, when Poirot asked to be left alone in the library. The walls were covered with leather-bound volumes and faded family photographs. The room smelled of old paper and lavender, with a faint trace of smoke that still lingered since Lady Rosalind's death. Poirot, sitting upright in a high-backed armchair, drummed his fingers patiently, waiting for the one person who had yet to speak. Helen Worsley, the deceased's great-niece, appeared shortly after. Tall, thin, with a pale face and dark eyes that betrayed no emotion, she seemed made of hand-blown glass, fragile and precise. She moved with the tense elegance of someone who doesn't want to be seen, but knows she's being watched. Mr. Poirot, he said in a voice so gentle it forced the detective to lean forward slightly. I was told you wished to speak with me. Oui, Mademoiselle Helene. Just a few minutes of your time. I didn't see you during the more visible moments of the duel. Helen was unfazed. I'm not usually affectionate. My aunt knew that. And you were in Langford the day Lady Rosalind received the letter. Helen nodded. I spent the morning in the greenhouse. Then I went up to my room. I didn't see the letter. I only learned the contents after Charlotte read it aloud. And what did you think? That it was too late? Rosalind had been waiting for something like this. Waiting for a threat. No, waiting for consequences. My aunt was a woman who lived too long, convinced she had escaped the unforgivable. Poirot narrowed his eyes. Are you suggesting that Lady Rosalind committed a crime? Helen was silent for a moment before answering. What is a crime, Mr. Poirot? An illegal act, or an act that irrevocably shatters someone else's life? I don't know what happened in Corsica. I only know that after that summer, Rosalind changed her will for the first time. In your favour? Helen shook her head with an almost imperceptible gesture. In her favour. Previously, the estate was to be divided between Charlotte, Reverend Greaves, and Lord Edwin. Then everything went back to hers. And just a week ago, she changed it again. Poirot sat up in his seat, suddenly alert. "Are you aware of the contents of that last will and testament?" "No, but I know it was written, signed, and sent to his lawyer in London. Apparently, it never arrived." Poirot stood up gravely. He walked a few steps across the library until he stopped in front of a locked writing desk. Helen followed his gaze. "That belonged to my grandfather. Rosalind kept it, though she never used it. No one has opened it in years. Then, mademoiselle, if you allow me." Poirot examined the lock, noticing a faint scratch mark on the brass rim. He asked Hastings to fetch Elsie, the maid who brought the bunch of antique keys. On the third attempt, the secretary opened with a slight click. Inside were old papers, a sealed envelope, and an unopened letter addressed to the lawyer, Mr. Arthur Lincoln, private notary, London. The date, the day before Lady Rosalind's death. Poirot took out the letter with great care, and there you have it, he murmured. The letter that never arrived. He opened the envelope slowly. The letter was written in firm handwriting, and after reading the first few paragraphs, Poirot's eyes sparkled with a subtle sparkle. "This changes a lot," he said dryly. "Who's the heir?" Helen asked, her lips barely moving. Poirot didn't reply immediately. He folded the letter, returned it to the envelope, and put it in his inside jacket pocket. "Mademoiselle, I can't tell you yet. Just this. Someone had a lot to lose if this paper fell into the lawyer's hands. And when someone has something to lose, they're often willing to kill for it." Helen didn't reply, but something in her gaze hardened. Not fear, not surprise, something more subtle, as if, finally, an invisible piece had fallen into place. Chapter 5. The locked diary. The rain was beating steadily against the windows of Langford Chase as Poirot and Hastings returned to Lady Rosalind's room. The mansion seemed to fall silent as they passed, as if the walls themselves knew the mystery was drawing ever closer. Poirot didn't speak as they climbed the stairs. His mind worked silently, assembling pieces that were still incomplete. Upon arrival, the room was exactly as they had left it. The bed was spotless, the divan where Rosalind had been found still unmoved. Hastings noticed Poirot pause in front of a small wooden display case next to the dressing table. "What do you see there, Poirot?" "A chest, my friend. One that's not in plain sight, but carefully hidden among common objects. And most importantly, locked." He was referring to a dark cedar box with an antique lock and a fleur-de-lis carved into the lid. Poirot asked Elsie for help again, and she returned with the same set of keys. After several attempts, the mechanism gave way with a dry click. Inside, wrapped in a lace handkerchief, lay a green leather-bound diary, with the initials R.W. stamped in gold. The pages, still intact, were handwritten in elegant but nervous calligraphy. Poirot flicked through them slowly, pausing at a section marked with a silk ribbon. August 1934. Bonifacio, Corsica. He read softly. Interesting. Very interesting. Hastings came closer, and together they read selected passages I saw him again. I shouldn't have agreed, but something about the way he speaks makes it hard to think clearly. Maurice says we should leave everything behind, but how can we do that when a life is at stake? Charlotte is suspicious. She thinks I came alone, but she heard my conversation on the hotel phone. If she talks, it'll all be over. Not just for me, but for Maurice too. I signed the document today. There was no other way out. I can't carry that guilt forever. I did what he asked, but I know that one day someone will come looking for me. Poirot closed the diary slowly, as if he were holding a locket rather than a mere object. Hastings, this is revealing, but not yet in legal terms. We don't have full names or exact dates, only fragments, and an echo of fear. Who is Maurice? A lover? An accomplice? A blackmailer? Perhaps all three. But the most significant thing is this. Lady Rosalind feared Charlotte would discover her secret, and the anonymous letter appeared right in Charlotte's presence. Coincidence? Hard to accept. At that moment, a soft knock at the door interrupted them. It was Helen. "Excuse me," he said calmly. "I thought it prudent to let you know that Charlotte has packed her bags. She says she'll be returning to London this afternoon." Poirot stood up immediately. No, that can't be. Hastings, we must stop her, and quickly." In the hall, Charlotte was coming down the stairs with a determined expression. She was wearing a grey coat and carrying a worn leather suitcase. When she saw Poirot, she pressed her lips together in annoyance. "Are you going to arrest me too, Monsieur Poirot?" "No, mademoiselle. I only wish to understand. Why now? Why leave just when the questions are beginning to have answers?" "Because I'm sick of this house, its whispers and its damned secrets. Rosalind's gone. I have no reason to stay." Poirot took a step closer. "Not even to clarify what happened that summer in Corsica." Charlotte paled. Her hand trembled slightly on the suitcase handle. I don't know what you're talking about." "Really?" "Because Lady Rosalind thought otherwise. Your diary suggests you heard something compromising, and you've had years to think about what to do with that information." Charlotte took a deep breath. Her eyes darkened, but she didn't reply. Poirot took a step further. "Mademoiselle, if you leave now, no one will believe you're innocent, not even me." The tension in the lobby was as thick as the fog behind the windows. Charlotte looked down. "Give me an hour," he murmured. "There's something you need to see, but not here, in the stables, at 6. Poirot nodded gently. "At 6, then." Charlotte climbed the stairs in silence. Poirot watched her disappear down the upper corridor before returning to Hastings. He'll show us something he doesn't dare reveal in front of the others. Do you think he trusts us? No, Hastings, he doesn't trust. He's afraid. Chapter 6. Shadows in the Stables. The hall clock struck 6 when Poirot and Hastings, protected by heavy overcoats against the persistent drizzle, crossed the back garden towards the Langford Chase stables. The mist seemed to have thickened deliberately, as if wishing to conceal more than it revealed. Only the faint crunch of their footsteps on the wet gravel broke the silence. The stables, though well built, displayed the neglect of an estate that no longer accommodated horses. The side door was ajar. Poirot gently pushed it open. The interior smelled of damp hay, old oil, and rotten wood. Charlotte was waiting for them in the far corner, next to an old tack room. She carried a lit lantern, its beams flickering against the stone walls. "Thanks for coming," he said softly. "We don't have much time." Poirot nodded, moving forward slowly. "We're here, mademoiselle. What do you want to show us?" Charlotte bent down beside the locker, pried open a rusty hinge, and pulled out a package wrapped in waxed cloth. She unwrapped it with trembling hands, revealing a series of documents, letters, and black-and-white photographs. Hastings crouched down beside her, while Poirot watched from above. "I found them years ago," she explained. "Rosalind hid them here, thinking no one would look for them. I read them. I didn't understand everything then. I was just a teenager. But I knew they shouldn't be there. I never told her." Poirot took one of the letters. It was dated 1934, on the letterhead of a hotel in Bonifacio, Corsica. The handwriting was the same as Rosalind's diary. It read, "Maurice insists. He says there's no other way out. But I refuse. Charlotte can't find out. She's suffered enough since her mother died." Another envelope contained a worn photograph. Rosalind on a sunny terrace, standing next to a thinly built man with a thin moustache, holding a glass and a mocking expression. On the back, barely legible, "Monsieur Bellamy, Bastia, 1932. "Who is he?" Hastings asked. Charlotte shook her head. "I never knew for sure. But my mother mentioned his name once. Maurice Bellamy, a Frenchman. She said Rosaline owed him a debt." Poirot picked up a third letter, this one unsigned in clumsy French. The ink was reddish, almost rusty. "You don't decide, you pay. What we did doesn't go unburied. I'll see you soon." Poirot closed his eyes for a moment, as if mentally arranging a box of chess pieces. Then he spoke softly. "Mademoiselle, why are you showing it to us now?" Charlotte straightened, her expression resigned. "Because I thought it was over, that no one else knew. But then the letters arrived. First yours, then that damn anonymous threat. And Rosalind. Well, you know what happened. I think someone else found this hiding place, or knew it existed. And you? I feared for myself, yes, but even more so for Helen. That's why I have to leave. This doesn't belong to me anymore." Poirot approached, placed a hand on the papers, and carefully picked them up. "Au contraire, it belongs to everyone, to the past and the present, and it brings us closer to a truth that can no longer be buried." A dry sound then echoed outside, a footstep on the gravel. Hastings turned the lantern toward the door. Only a shadow slipped through the hedges. Poirot took a step forward, his voice firm. "Who's there?" Silence. Then a click. Something metallic. And then nothing. Charlotte paled. Were they listening to us? "It seems so," said Poirot. "And whoever did it now knows we're too close." Back at the mansion, Poirot placed the documents in a sealed folder and packed it in his suitcase. His face was not filled with fear, but with iron determination. "Hastings, we'll go into town early tomorrow. I want to see Lawyer Lincoln and check the French death register. Do you think Bellamy is still alive? If he doesn't, someone very clever has taken his place. And that person isn't afraid to get his hands dirty." Chapter 7. The Missing Name. The next morning dawned cold and clear. with a clarity that contrasted sharply with the growing mystery surrounding Langford Chase. Poirot, impeccably dressed as always, descended into the hall with his folder of documents under his arm. Hastings was waiting for him with 2 train tickets in his hand and a thermos of coffee that Mrs. Ware, the housekeeper, had insisted on preparing. "Everything's ready, Poirot. The train to London leaves in 45 minutes. Mr. Lincoln has already been notified." Poirot nodded, but his eyes were fixed on the envelope containing the will, still unopened since its recovery. "Before we leave, mon ami, there's something I want to check. Come with me." They went to Lady Rosalind's office, a small room upholstered in dark green velvet, where the deceased had been accustomed to reviewing her accounts and personal correspondence. Poirot went directly to the desk, where several unexamined folders were still filed. Wearing white gloves, he removed a wooden box labelled C, Personal Correspondence, and began to search carefully. He soon found what he was looking for: a letter from 1935, signed by a certain Jean-Marie Bellamy, sent from Paris. "Interesting," Poirot murmured. "Jean-Marie, not Maurice." Perhaps he called himself Maurice for sentimental reasons, or to conceal his identity. Look at this. The text was short, but revealing. "Rosalind, I have no choice. I've signed the papers. The child is registered under the surname you requested. But one day this will have to come to light. You can't build a life on silence." Hastings frowned. "A child? Exactly. And now we have a motive beyond sentimental. This is the heart of Langford's secret. Rosalind and Bellamy had a son, but he was never legally recognized. However," Poirot touched the will envelope, "if this new will mentions him, then the motive changes completely. It's not just revenge, it's fear. Fear of losing a fortune, or seeing it fall into someone else's hands." The office of Arthur Lincoln, the private notary, was an elegant but modest office in Mayfair, a place that spoke of discretion rather than wealth. The tall, thin man, wearing gold-rimmed glasses, greeted Poirot and Hastings with a troubled expression. "Lady, Rosalind's death came as a profound shock to me. Barely a week earlier, she had written to me with the intention of amending her will. But the document never arrived." "Monsieur Lancôme," said Poirot in his characteristically affable but firm tone, "we have recovered that letter. Inside was, as I suspected, a new signed and dated will. I wish you to examine it." The notary opened the envelope, carefully examined the seals, the signature, the date, and paled when he read the name of the principal heir. This is unprecedented. Here, a certain person is designated as the sole beneficiary, David Bellamy, born in France in 1935, biological son of the testator, and currently under another name for legal reasons. This changes everything." Hastings leaned towards Poirot, alarmed. "Does that mean that all of Langford's fortune was supposed to go to that David?" "Exactly. And not only that. This will explicitly nullifies the previous one, which leaves Edwin, Charlotte and Helen without any rights." "But who is David Bellamy today?" Hastings asked. "Where is he? Does he live in England? Do you even know who he is?" Poirot stood up solemnly. "We don't know yet, but someone at Langford Chase knows. Someone who was afraid this will would get out, and whoever sent the anonymous letter to. So, do you think that someone is one of the current heirs?" Poirot didn't reply immediately. He looked out the window, where the city bustled on indifferently. Then, in a low, almost melancholy voice, he said, "The saddest thing, Hastings, is that when you kill for fear of losing, you've already lost everything." That afternoon, back in Langford, another shock awaited them. Mrs. Ware greeted them at the entrance, her face pale. "Mr. Poirot, something has happened. Someone has broken into Lady Rosalind's room. Everything is in disarray, and the papers are gone." Poirot went upstairs immediately, with Hastings following him. Upon entering, they found open drawers, ripped cushions, and books scattered on the floor. The cedar box containing the diary empty. Poirot looked towards the corridor, where a figure was fading away at the end near the east gallery. "Too late," said Poirot, with an unusual note of frustration in his voice. "Someone has decided that it is better to destroy the truth than to face it." Chapter 8. Echoes between the walls. The silence in Lady Rosalind's ransacked room was almost sacred, as if even the overturned objects were waiting to be replaced by Poirot's meticulous hand. The Belgian detective, however, made no move to tidy things up. He simply walked slowly around the room, pausing briefly at each altered detail. "This wasn't a random search, Hastings," he said finally. "It was methodical. Whoever did it knew exactly what they wanted, and what they feared others would find." Hastings nodded, cautiously examining the interior of the writing desk that had contained the testamentary letter. "And what do you think they were looking for?" Poirot picked up a torn envelope from the floor. The diary, the rest of the letters, any mention of David Bellamy. But there's something else. Notice this mark on the carpet next to the couch. Hastings ducked. A heel? A man's shoe. A men's shoe, but not a work shoe. This isn't a field boot. It's an Oxford with a leather sole. Who in this house wears shoes like that, even indoors? Lord Edwin, Hastings replied after a pause, and the Reverend Greaves, though it could also be Helen, Poirot added softly. Always impeccable, always invisible. He turned to Mrs. Ware, who was watching them with wide eyes from the doorway. "Madame, who found the room in this state?" "Elsie, the maid. She was going to wax the floor like every Friday. She said the door was ajar, and something didn't seem right. She didn't touch anything. She came straight to get me. And nobody saw anything. Not yet. Although the woman hesitated, there is something that may not be important. This morning, Helen asked for an old wooden box. She said it belonged to her mother. It was in the attic." Poirot narrowed his eyes. "And did anyone else?" "No, just me. I was the one who gave it to her." "Have you seen her since then?" "No. She said she was going to lock herself away to sort out papers, and didn't want to be bothered." Poirot exchanged a quick glance with Hastings. Without wasting any time, they left the room and headed to the west wing, where Helen's room was. They knocked twice. No one answered. Poirot tried the handle. Locked. "It's not wise to force doors," Hastings said, worried, "and neither is leaving questions unanswered." Poirot bent down, examined the lock, and with the help of an old hairpin, which Hastings never understood where he always got it from, manufactured a quiet click. The room was dim. The curtains were drawn, the table lamp was on. On the desk, a neatly arranged stack of documents, and in the centre, Rosalind's green diary. But how? It wasn't stolen, Hastings, just displaced. Helen didn't destroy anything. She just removed it. Discreetly. At that moment, the creaking of a floorboard caught his attention. It wasn't coming from the door. It was coming from the wall. Poirot raised his hand and walked over to the wooden panel next to the wardrobe. He knocked. Hollow. A false door. Hastings helped him find the mechanism. Within seconds, a section of the panel rotated with a soft creak, revealing a narrow passage between the walls. "That explains a lot," said Poirot, stepping inside without hesitation. The gallery was dark, dusty, and smelled of damp. They walked about 20 metres until they emerged at a trapdoor hidden behind the large grandfather clock in the east corridor. This passageway allows you to move around the house unseen. Someone used it last night to get into Rosalind's room, Hastings deduced. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. And that someone knew about the tunnel. Very few could have known. Rosalind, perhaps. Her older brother, Edwin, maybe Helen. They left the gallery and headed back to the hall. On the way, Poirot stopped. "Hastings, tell me, what's the most suspicious thing that's happened since we arrived? The anonymous letter? No, the most suspicious thing is that no one has ever asked about David Bellamy, as if everyone already knows who he is." Hastings stared at him. "Are you suggesting that the lost heir has been here all along?" Poirot smiled faintly, and in a low but vibrant voice said, "Yes, my friend, and I think we've already seen it. We just need one more thing, to get him talking." Chapter 9. The name no one spoke. Evening was falling slowly over Langford Chase, tinting the windows a faint amber. Poirot, sitting in front of the fireplace in the main drawing-room, gazed into the flames as if the embers might provide him with the last missing pieces of his puzzle. Hastings, beside him, nervously stirred the contents of an undrunk cup of tea. "You said the heir has been here the whole time," he said finally. "And he hasn't told us?" "No, my friend, because maybe he doesn't know, or maybe he suspects it but has no proof. In any case, someone else does know, and that someone has tried to erase all traces before the heir finds out." "And you think that someone is Edwin?" Poirot gently shook his head. "Lord Edwin is a proud and possessive man, but he lacks the intelligence to play such a subtle game. No, the one behind it is someone more calculating, someone capable of lying with composure, someone who knows how to observe and wait." At that moment, a light knock sounded at the door. Mrs. Ware peeked her head out. "Excuse me, Mr. Poirot. Reverend Greaves wishes to speak with you. He says it's urgent." The Reverend waited in the library, standing by the window, his face creased with unusual tension. He held an envelope in his hands, clearly old, yellowed around the edges. Seeing Poirot and Hastings, he turned sharply. "Found it among my father's books," he said without preamble. "It was hidden inside an old Bible. One Lady Rosalind gave me many years ago. I don't know if it was an oversight, or if she wanted me to find it at just the right moment." Poirot accepted the envelope, opened it carefully, and took out a plain, typewritten sheet of paper with Rosalind's handwritten signature at the bottom. It was a French birth certificate, dated Bastia, 1935, David Jean-Marie Bellamy. Mother, Rosalind Worsley. Father, Jean-Marie Bellamy, Poirot read aloud. This is what someone wanted to disappear forever. Now you know, the Reverend said, his voice dry. The child exists, he existed, and if he's alive, all of this belongs to him. Poirot folded the document neatly and placed it in his inside jacket pocket. Then he fixed his gaze on the Reverend. And why, Mr. Greaves, do you decide to hand him over right now? The Reverend sighed. Because I'm tired of secrets, and because this house is suffocating me. Rosalind trusted me, in her own way. She asked me to keep it, to never mention it. But she also told me something else shortly before she died. What did he say to you? Greaves hesitated, then murmured that the past would come for her, and that when it did, I had to protect. Umber Poirot slowly straightened up. Did you protect David? I didn't know who he was. I still don't. Oh, sir, I think you do know, but you didn't want to see it. Not you, not anyone's in this house. Because admitting it would mean admitting it was all a lie. That evening, Poirot asked all the inhabitants of the house, Edwin, Helen, Charlotte, and the Reverend, to gather in the drawing room. Charlotte arrived first, her expression tense. Helen, serene as ever, sat by the fireplace. Edwin appeared last, frowning. "What's all this about, Poirot?" he said impatiently. "Do you have something to tell us, or not?" Poirot stood up. He walked slowly to the centre of the room, his hands clasped behind his back. "My friends, this house has lived for many years on a foundation of secrets. But secrets always germinate, sometimes in the form of guilt, sometimes in the form of greed, and sometimes in the form of a silent life relegated to a corner of the family without a name or inheritance." Everyone watched him in silence. Poirot turned to Helen. "Mademoiselle, do you know what your mother was hiding in that box she borrowed from the attic?" Helen raised her chin. "Papers, photographs, fragments of a past I didn't want to see." "Did they include a birth certificate?" "Yeah, did. You read it?" A slight tremor crossed his lips. "Yeah, then you know. You know what Lady Rosalind feared, and why she decided to change her will." Poirot turned to the rest. "David Bellamy is not a stranger. He is not a ghost from the past. He is someone who has lived among you, who has been treated as a distant relative, as a blood favour, as a presence tolerated but never acknowledged." Everyone looked at him expectantly. Poirot stopped in front of the fireplace. "David Bellamy, as Rosalind's son, and if my calculations are correct, is here, right now." Chapter 10. The hidden sun. The air in the room grew thick. Poirot's accusation hung like a storm cloud over everyone present. Charlotte pressed her lips together tightly. Edwin frowned, visibly irritated. Helen remained motionless, her face a mask of ice. Reverend Greaves was the first to speak. "Are you saying that one of us is David Bellamy?" Poirot raised an eyebrow gently. "Not necessarily. I said that is here. I didn't say he'd sit in one of these chairs." The confusion lasted only a few seconds. Hastings took a step forward. "So, the legitimate heir," said Poirot, "has been among us all this time, without knowing who he is. And those who did know have done everything possible to keep him in the dark. He walked to the door and knocked softly. At that moment, Elsie, the young maid, came in. Her eyes were downcast, her hands clasped nervously. "Thank you for coming, mademoiselle," Poirot said gently. "Don't be afraid. No one here judges you." Charlotte jumped up. "This is a farce. Are you implying that the maid—" "Not the maid," interrupted Poirot. "Herson." The silence was absolute. Elsie, her voice breaking, spoke for the first time. "I didn't know anything until 2 days ago. I found a letter in the box Miss Helen asked me to keep. It said that my father's name was Jean-Marie Bellamy, that I was born in Lyon in 1935. I was raised in England by a family who were friends of Rosalind's. I thought it was a coincidence that I was working here, in this house, but then I overheard your conversation about David Bellamy, and I understood." Poirot nodded. "It wasn't a coincidence. Rosalind brought her here. She wanted to see her up close, perhaps protect her, but she never had the courage to tell the truth, until death forced her to prepare for it." Helen spoke now, her voice low but firm. "I knew it from the moment she arrived. Mrs. Ware told me that there was something about her familiar. And then I found the letters. And you decided to remain silent. Because it was too late. Because if Rosalind hadn't done it, why would I?" "Because the truth doesn't wait to be comfortable," Poirot replied mildly. Edwin had also stood up. His face was red, not from surprise, but from suppressed anger. "And what does he want now? Have us hand over Langford to a servant, an illegitimate daughter, with only a piece of French paper as proof?" "Monsieur," Poirot said harshly, "I remind you that a French slip of paper is enough to change the history of an entire family. And in this case, it's also enough to invalidate your claim to the will." Charlotte, pale, sank into the armchair. "All this time, Rosalind knew. She made us fight each other, but she knew no one else would inherit." "Not exactly," Poirot corrected. "Rosalind didn't decide to inherit from him out of love. She did it out of blame. And what changed everything was that someone knew before that this will existed. He turned to everyone, and that's why Lady Rosalind was poisoned." Helen stood up. "And do you know who did it?" Poirot nodded gravely. "Oui, and I'll prove it tomorrow. But first, I want to know what you'll do now, you, Miss Elsie." Elsie covered her face for a moment, trying to compose herself. "I don't want Langford. I don't want anything. I just want to know why they denied me my name, why they hid me." "It wasn't out of hate," Helen said, her voice barely audible. "It was out of fear." Poirot looked at everyone one by one. "And fear, my friends, is the most lethal of poisons." Later that evening, Poirot remained alone in the library, reviewing Rosalind's diary for the last time. In the margin, he found something he had missed before, a word written in darker, perhaps more recent ink. "The contract." "Ah," Poirot whispered. "Voilà. Just what I needed." Someone had signed a deal with Rosalind, someone who now had too much to lose if it came to light. Poirot gently closed the diary. "Tomorrow, mes amis, will be the final revelation." Chapter 11. The Last Deception. The next morning dawned with a sky so clear It seemed to mock the emotional turmoil stirring Langford Chase. Mrs. Ware had prepared breakfast as usual, but hardly anyone touched it. Charlotte didn't come down from her room. Edwin took a couple of laps around the garden before shutting himself in his study. Reverend Greaves paced back and forth in the library, muttering aimlessly to himself. Helen remained invisible. And Elsie, she hadn't slept. Poirot, on the other hand, seemed calmer than ever. Impeccable in his pearl-grey suit and burgundy tie, he calmly sipped his coffee next to the grandfather clock in the hall, the same one that concealed the trap-door to the secret passage. Hastings, although accustomed to his calculated silences, could not hide his anxiety. "Well, Poirot, wouldn't it be better to gather them together now?" "Soon, mon ami. But there's still one piece missing. The killer has made a mistake. A small one, almost imperceptible, but enough. And this morning I'm sure he'll try." "Delete it." Hastings looked at him in disbelief. "Are you suggesting he's going to act today?" "Yes, and I'm waiting for you with open arms." At 10 o'clock, Poirot and Hastings returned to Lady Rosalind's office. Poirot asked that no one interrupt them. On the desk, he placed the 3 key objects: the diary, the letter with the will, and the note with the word, the contract handwritten. Then he sat on the couch and waited. 35 minutes passed. At 10:35, the door handle moved slowly. Poirot exchanged a brief glance with Hastings, who was already standing behind a bookcase, as planned. He entered Helen. He was dressed in black, as if preparing for a funeral. He quietly closed the door. He approached the desk. His fingers slid toward the journal. When he opened it, his eyes fell directly on the word written in the margin. Poirot then sat up, his voice soft. "Are you looking for something, mademoiselle?" Helen was startled, but she didn't back down. "I wanted to confirm that I was still here. The diary, yeah, or the contract." "Silence. There is no contract," Helen said finally. Poirot tilted his head. "Are you sure? Because in this house nothing ever disappears completely. And I'm afraid that Rosalind in the end, yeah. He wanted to put it on record. He was afraid of you, mademoiselle. More than of Edwin, more than of Charlotte. Because you don't act with rage or impulse, but with calculation." Helen watched him for a long moment. Then she sat down on the opposite couch, carefully crossing her legs. "I didn't kill her, if that's what you're implying." "Oh, I'm not implying it, mademoiselle." "I affirm," Helen was unfazed. "And your proof?" Poirot stood up, walking slowly to the desk. He picked up the diary. "You thought you destroyed everything related to David Bellamy, but you forgot something. The contract. Rosalind drew up a legal agreement with you over a year ago. A trade. You agreed to remain silent about the lost son in exchange for a portion of the inheritance." Helen pressed her lips together. "A draft. It was never signed." "Are you sure?" Poirot opened the diary to a cloth-covered section, where there was a small, precisely sewn pocket. From it, he extracted a folded sheet of paper with 2 signatures at the bottom. "It was you who prepared the poison, Helen. Not in the drink, not in a bottle, in the letter." The absorbent paper had been impregnated with cyanide vapours that were activated by the heat of the fire. Rosalind held her close to the brazier, as she always did, and breathed. "You didn't need to be present." "That's a theory," Helen said. but her voice was no longer firm. "What if I told you that the paper in that letter was traced to an exclusive London bookstore where you have an account? Coincidence? What if the ink contained traces of stabilized potassium dicyanide, a compound that only someone with chemical knowledge would access?" Helen remained silent. Poirot took a step closer. "You didn't act out of hate. You acted out of con, because the arrival of Elsie, of David, threatened the world you had silently built. And because Rosalind, in the end, decided to correct her mistake. She disinherited you." Helen, still seated, looked down. For a long moment she said nothing. "She made me invisible my whole life," he whispered. "She gave me just enough to live, but never enough to decide. I didn't mean to kill her, just to scare her, but I miscalculated the heat of the fire." Poirot closed his eyes for a moment. "Assassins never calculate well, mademoiselle, because they always underestimate one thing, that the truth, sooner or later, breathes." That night, the police arrived for Helen Worsley. She offered no resistance. In the hallway, as she was being led away, she passed by Elsie. They didn't exchange words, but the same emotion shone in both their eyes. Pity, for lives marked by secrets that should never have been hidden. Poirot, from the threshold, murmured, "Justice doesn't always bring peace, but it does bring closure." Chapter 12. The Legacy of Langford Chase. The week following Helen Worsley's arrest passed with the tense calm that follows a storm. The press, always hungry for aristocratic scandals, was quick to report the Mansion murder and the lost heir of Corsica. Headlines spoke of betrayal, fortune, and poison with almost morbid relish. But inside Langford Chase, the survivors of the tragedy had no time for headlines. Elsie, now legally recognized as David Bellamy, had repeatedly refused to speak to reporters. He remained in the room that had once been Rosalind's, reading the diary slowly, as if each word would help him reconstruct an identity that had been stolen from him without permission. Poirot, for his part, was already preparing his return to London. In the tea-room where it had all begun, he sat once more next to Hastings, who was leafing through an edition of Times with a distracted expression. "This whole thing was more sad than brilliant," he commented. "A tragedy with layers of politeness. I still have trouble seeing Helen as a murderer. Because, mon ami, she wasn't violent. Her crime wasn't calculated, yes, but no less human. He didn't kill out of hatred, but out of fear. Fear of disappearing altogether when he finally believed he'd earned a place." Poirot carefully smoothed out an invisible wrinkle in the tablecloth. "And Elsie? Do you think she'll want to keep the property?" "Ah," Poirot smiled gently. "That he's already decided." In the middle of the afternoon, Elsie asked to see Poirot in the rose garden, by the wrought-iron bench where Rosalind used to have tea in the summer. She was dressed simply, without jewellery or makeup, but with a presence that seemed newly acquired. She was no longer the soft-stepping maid. She was someone who had reclaimed her name. "Mr. Poirot," he said bluntly, "they offered me the right to stay. The lawyers say I can claim the property. There won't be any formal opposition. But I don't want Langford Chase." Poirot nodded without surprise. "Too many memories. Too many ghosts." "Exactly. I've spent the last few days reading what my mother wrote. The letters, the diaries, it hurt. It hurt knowing she loved me, and yet she still chose to erase me from the world. And do you understand it? Not entirely, but I'm starting to forgive her. Poirot nodded approvingly. That's wise. There are those who die without having achieved it. Elsie took a deep breath. I want to sell the property, and use some of the money to create something in her name. A home for orphan children, perhaps. So no one else grows up not knowing who they are. Poirot smiled, genuinely moved. A noble idea, mademoiselle, transforming a legacy of silence into one of voice. He stood up, and together they walked among the rose bushes, where the last flowers of summer were beginning to close. Evening fell over Langford with a clear sky. Hastings and Poirot set off at dusk. As the car continued along the drive, Hastings turned toward the mansion, disappearing into the trees. Do you have any doubts, Poirot? Just one. Which? At what exact moment did Rosalind know that Helen would be her most silent enemy? Poirot looked out the window thoughtfully. Was it when she signed the contract? When she confessed to him about the child? Or when, after years of silence, she decided to speak out too late? And what answer do you prefer? Poirot smiled. I'd rather not know. Some questions should remain unanswered, Hastings. They're the ones that remind us that, no matter how brilliant the grey cells, the human soul will remain a mystery deeper than any crime. The car disappeared into the distance, leaving behind a house that finally stopped holding secrets.